session. I'm DJ Food. Hello. Thanks for coming. So about late 77, 78, you put an ad in the NME for some like-minded people to form a band. I don't think you had a name back then.
No.
So obviously that was, you know, just past punk or in the middle of punk.
Yeah, past punk.
What was your take on all that? Was that why you put the ad in?
I never liked punk. My older brother Andrew was a punk, and I've mentioned this before, but he was one of the original punks actually. He was at the 100 Club to see the Sex Pistols, and he used to bring all this interesting music back. But the only punk that I really liked was Sex Pistols. There was a fantastic bootleg album, I can't remember the name of it now, but I really liked that, and The Clash. But the rest of it I found sort of like the herd mentality, you know, they all dressed up the same, listened to the same music, and most of the music sounded the same, and they would say, you know, we just want to be different. You get a similar thing today, I suppose.
But you saw them back then, or you would?
I didn't see the Sex Pistols. I saw the Clash, but I was more interested in. Then Andrew started to turn me onto some interesting music from New York. You know, television, Patti Smith, early Talking Heads, and I really liked that. It was far more interesting to me. And also around about that time we had this very interesting period in British music, which is referred to as, you know, post-punk. There's this sort of laziness to attach these labels to everything, but the post-punk, and I've mentioned before, they were big influences on me, the bands like Cabaret Voltaire, Throbbing Gristle, and my old friend Thomas Lear, Robert Rental, and from America bands like The Residents. So this was fantastic to me. I was working in a recording studio at the time. And most of my colleagues, apart from a fellow called Colin Lloyd Tucker, who I work with, who's still a very good friend of mine, but most of them, during the lunch hour, would put on things like the Eagles and Tom Petty, and I suppose it's so boring, this music. But Colin turned me on to Velvet Underground. I remember the very first Velvet Underground song I heard was What Goes On. It was the exact same moment I smoked my first joint when I was 15. So those two memories are entwined in my mind. But I couldn't figure out, was it Lou Reed's guitar or John Cowell's keyboard playing that fantastic solo in What Goes On. So music like that I was getting exposed to really was opening me up to all sorts of things. So that period of time was a fantastic, very fertile time in not just British popular music but American as well.
And what were you into? What were you brought up with? What were your parents playing?
Well, my Uncle Kenny, some of you may know, was East London's top music promoter in the 60s. He promoted from Jerry Lee Lewis, Gene Vincent, The Kinks, The Who, and a lot of these bands played in my parents' pub in the Two Puddings, so we were very exposed to music. I've used the phrase coming up through the floorboards, but it literally was, you know, our mum would put us to bed and we'd be hearing all this music coming up. And our favourite album though, which we got later on in the 60s, was the Beatles' White Album. Loved that album, me and my brothers, and we just played it and played it and played it because it was so varied.
Very eclectic.
And years later, of course, found out, well, lots of they weren't even in the studio at the same time together. They were falling out. It was the low point between the personalities. But I didn't realise that as a kid, of course. I just thought, this is incredible that one band can be over here, then over there, then over there. So that was the biggest single influence on me.
Because John Lennon was a big influence as a songwriter, wasn't he?
Yeah, huge influence. Not just him as a songwriter, but also his political view. You know, he's. And a phrase that stuck in my mind of his was "tell the truth and make it rhyme," you know, and that is something that I try to, you know, keep close to my heart. You know, just as a public figure, you know, he really, interestingly, his voice, his use of effects in the studio was quite an influence, particularly my early, you know, Burning Blue Soul era. But of course, then I found out years later the reason he put so many effects on his voice because he hated his voice, which seems crazy really, because he had such a fantastic voice. But in his mind, he was a Liverpudlian lad, and he was comparing himself to Elvis Presley. And if you listen to those early Sun recordings, Elvis's voice is just sensational. Or Roy Orbison, all those guys had astonishing voices. So I suppose from John Lennon's point of view, he probably thought, God, I'm never going to be able to sing as good as those guys. Make my voice sound like I'm talking through a telephone and put lots of echo on it because he was embarrassed. But interesting.
So where were you going out? The end of the end of the 70s and early 80s. What sort of venues?
Oh, everywhere. But actually, where Dwarf was next in Wardour Street, next to the old Marquee Club. So I was in there all the time. There was a lot of interesting underground venues. I remember seeing Throbbing Gristle in a place called the Crypt beneath a church. And so these unusual venues that you go to, they're the sort of places I really liked. You know, there was a sense that a real sense of counterculture. It's interesting actually. We've just passed Glastonbury weekend, but how Glastonbury has become so absorbed into the establishment now, almost as much a part of the establishment calendar as Wimbledon, really, isn't it? And you have the BBC and the Guardian and everybody's down there. And I just think, you know, if you want to be radical today, I think obviously first thing you do is you disconnect from corporate mainstream media. Second thing you do is you quit drinking alcohol. Very hard for some of you here. And the third thing, you don't get a tattoo. If you want to be a real radical.
All those with tattoos can leave now.
Yes, but most of my friends have them there. So.